meeting for Tuesday, August 8th of 2023. The time is 7 p.m. All rise for Pledge of Allegiance. Moving into consideration of the agenda, the primary aspect of the meeting tonight is to continue reviewing the ordinance revisions that we've got contemplated here. We're going to be covering Articles 3, 4, and 6, and obviously discussion on progress we've made thus far. So with that, from the commissioners, any questions or considerations of the agenda that we should think about before moving ahead?
I have none.
So hearing nothing, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as drafted?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Moving on, does any of the planning commissioners have what they perceive as a conflict of interest tonight? None? With that, we'll move to the approval for the meeting minutes from June 13th, June 26th, and June 28th. We'll start with June 13th. I was not at this meeting. So I guess I'd ask others that were to comment on these if it's adequate representation of what occurred that evening.
I just have one thing on 12D. It looks like that's just needing to be filled out. The time. Who made the motion? Who seconded?
Anybody recall who took? Okay, so we'll get that adjusted. Should we get that adjusted and then we'll approve them at the next meeting? With that, that actually is true moving on to June 26th then as well. I think I requested the motion, but I couldn't tell you who. Oh, there it is. We just don't know the time.
Yeah, we can take a look. I think part of the issue is because Jackie did them watching the recording. And if you don't state the time at the end, then, but you can look back and go, it took 3 hours and figure out what the time is for that. So we can do those minutes next time too.
Yeah, let's just hit all three of these next time.
Okay.
Okay, well, I guess for now, we'll move it to public comment on the agenda items. Anyone that would like to come forward, address the commission, please hand the comment cards to Laura.
I got one from Lee.
Okay,
You're up.
Is the green light on? Nope. Oh, yeah.
Well, at least I know it wasn't my fault. Well,
hold on just a second. We'll get one just so they can hear it through the TV better, not for our purposes, but.
there we go.
Thank you.
My name is Lee Scott. I live at 347 Northwest Torch Lake Drive. And I want to just begin my comments by saying how I simply don't understand with the Planning Commission dealing with such an important issue as the Township zoning ordinance that there's two people here. It just amazes me that more people aren't paying attention to what's going on with what this commission is doing. Anyway, I'm here simply to reiterate my comments from last November. I'll make it brief. I was a member of the steering committee that helped develop the revised zoning ordinance for your consideration. And at that time, I strongly objected to section 6.25 and 6.27, the wind turbines and the solar energy farms. And we decided that it was going to be left up to the planning commission to decide what to include and what to delete. I've had, I don't want to say it's extensive experience, but it's enough experience with wind turbines to fully understand the intense destruction of the environment when wind turbine farms are installed. And I'm not against green energy. I know it has its place, but I don't believe that there should be the type of destruction to the environment in a wooded area like ours and in a watershed like ours for these types of installations. Basically, you have to destroy several acres of woodland in Torch Lake Township to put in one turbine. And I just think that with all the problems we're having with Torch Lake right now, Torch Lake Protection Alliance is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for the next 3 years to try to fix, or at least identify what is making the lake change. And it is changing significantly. And it's a tremendous resource. And any type of watershed destruction will harm not only Torch Lake, but also the bay. The letter that I wrote back in November to the board, I assume you folks still have it. If not, I can send you a copy of it. There are 23 other Torch Lake residents that co-signed that with me, in support of me, I would say. And I probably would have gotten a lot more if I would have been a little more diligent in reaching out farther. But anyway, I just strongly recommend that 6.27 and 6.25 not be included in the new zoning ordinance. It wasn't in the old one. It shouldn't be in the new one. If it's not in there, then they're not allowed. If you leave it in there, it gives opportunity for anybody to find a way to put these installations in our township, which would have a lasting, devastating effect. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Get up there now, Janet? Okay.
My name is Janet Killian. I have a cottage in Eastport on Northeast Torch Lake Drive, and I too am opposed to wind turbines, so I'll put that on the record. And I'd also like to speak about the waterfront overlay district. When the Planning Commission first implemented the section on stairways, it didn't seem to be limited just to the shoreline. And so I think this is a great improvement to put it under shoreline so that it no longer applies to side setbacks and back setbacks. So I think that's good. The one thing I would suggest that you add is that make it more like the docks and rafts. If you have more frontage, then you should be allowed to have more stairway, more than just one stairway. So that would be my suggestion for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, I guess no further comments?
No.
Thank you. We'll move on to correspondence. Do we have any correspondence for this evening? No. Okay, any unfinished business from last time? I mean, I guess by definition, as long as we continue to go through this ordinance, it'll be unfinished until we're done. But beyond that, that's it, correct? Okay, let's move into the ordinance review this night. So Sarah, do you want to kind of walk us through where we left off last time and kind of bring us up to speed?
Sure. So in June, we had talked through quite a few sections by then, and we left kind of in Article 3. We kind of briefly looked at the map, but didn't spend too much time with it. And we didn't really talk about any of the zoning districts and the uses allowed in any of the districts or the setback requirements. So tonight on your agenda, we've got Article 3, which is all of the districts in one location. In your current zoning ordinance, each district has its own chapter or article. So this has it in one article. You'll see that you've got all the uses in table form. So you can easily see what uses are there, the approval process for them, and the parking requirements. And then you also have in that section any of the setbacks and a nice diagram that hopefully will help to represent the district. And so when someone comes in and wonders what they can do in their district or at their home, we can pull out a couple of pages, hand it to them and say, here's the usage, your setbacks, and kind of an example of a site plan if you want to apply for a permit, what it should look like. Hopefully that'll help to assist individuals when they're trying to do that. Just because, just as a general public, you don't usually know how to go through that process. So having that easily available. So that's the one chapter on that. And then Article 4 is kind of your overlay. So I'll just go briefly over them and then we'll go back to them. The overlay districts. And so that's where we put the waterfront regulations and the village business regulations. And we kind of started talking about the village district a little bit last time. But the intent of the overlay districts is it applies no matter what the underlying zoning district is. So waterfront applies to any property that has waterfront. We've defined what that is. Instead of creating a district specific to properties that touch water or creeks or streams, there's just an overlay that says, within 50 feet of water, you have to comply with these waterfront regulations. And tried to clean those up. The current ordinance, some of that language is really difficult to read through. So I did my best to keep kind of the same language, but maybe make some bullets, clear that up hopefully for you. I know that the steering committee kind of read through that. There are a few additional regulations in that overlay district. And that has to do with the shoreline protection strip, which you currently don't have anything related to that. And the steering committee kind of said, throw it in there, let the planning commission take a look at it, give you an idea. You can always walk back from that if it's something you're not interested from, but moving forward with that. And then Article 6 is kind of the companion to mostly Article 3, a little bit of Article 4, because it's specific design criteria for certain uses. So in your current ordinance, you'll notice that a lot of the uses and the articles have some of the criteria or the design standards right in that district. And then it's repeated over and over again every time you see that use. So here we have just that criteria listed one time. It's consistent in all the districts. And we have those cross-referenced back into Article 3. So you can hopefully look at Article 3 and say, oh yes, there are additional standards. I need to go to Article 6 and look for that. That's kind of one of the only sections where I cross-reference directly back and forth, because you always get caught up in cross-references when you're amending ordinances and they don't line up eventually, and it's always a struggle. But this, I think we found in that table on Article 3, it's helpful to try to match that up into Article 6. But we do have language at the beginning that if the cross-reference is wrong, it doesn't mean that people don't have to comply with the regulations later on. So I'm not sure how much we'll make through tonight. This is the real meaty part of the zoning ordinance. So I'm sure there'll be lots of comments. And the steering committee did spend quite a bit of time going through the uses. I will say that some of the uses were added into the districts. Some uses were changed the approval process. So maybe they were moved from a special use to a permitted use or permitted to a special use, just depending on how comfortable the committee or my recommendation related to a use. So it wouldn't surprise me if you look through and you go, we didn't have that before, this is new, or we need to bump up some of the approval process. And so when I say by right, that typically means anything that's residential, as far as a single family home or a duplex or an accessory building, those are just a land use permit, a zoning permit. Somebody comes into the office and gets that. But if it's something bigger, usually, let me see what a by right is. Usually I would say something commercial or multifamily. Those, even if they're by right, most of those will still end up in front of the planning commission with just a site plan, not the special use. So don't fear that you won't have any kind of review or contact with those bigger projects because they're listed by right. You will still see those items.
Sarah, when you had mentioned that there were additional things put into the use by right, what were the driving forces to put, does that mean, are you saying the list got expanded?
Some of the lists did get expanded. Most of it has to do with consistency throughout the districts. For example, maybe one of the districts didn't list accessory uses, where we would pull that in because really accessory uses or accessory structures should be allowed in any of your districts. Some of the uses are uses that were not in the current ordinance but need to be there under state law. That usually has to do with daycare homes and adult foster care homes. There's a certain threshold that the Zoning Enabling Act requires you to treat them just like a single family dwelling. So some of those uses were brought in. The public uses, so kind of a lot of times you talk about them as being essential services. Those were brought into all of the districts and kind of spelled out what the process is for that.
So to make them consistent across district where appropriate, to make them meet state law. Do you recall anything in particular that where the list was expanded just because, well, maybe we should add that type of business or that type of?
Yeah, and it's probably more in your commercial district, I would say. Talking about, and some of the uses are different than what we have. So like small distilleries, small wineries, tasting rooms, some of that language. There is some of that in your current ordinance, but we kind of cleaned that up and actually brought it into the district instead of standing out on its own. Some of the other items would be, let me look at the district real quick. Maybe breaking some of the uses out just from the list or broadening the use. I don't know if you recall when we were talking in Article 10, kind of when a lot of you first started, and it talked about specific retail stores, you know, that you could have like a secondhand store or this or that. We just say a retail store. So some of those uses you'll see change. We did add in sexually oriented businesses in the commercial district, so that's not currently in your ordinance. That's something that usually we put in here because if somebody comes along and wants to open one, they're going to challenge you, and it's nice to have the language in place instead of having to adopt that on the fly. But that's something that some communities leave into the district, some communities take it out, wait for it to come along, and then write the language for that. And then some of the public comment did mention also, you know, solar farms and large wind turbines. So right now, a personal solar, so something that you could put on your home or your farm to provide energy to that site only, we treat more like an accessory building. But there's language in the draft related to personal solar. But then we did talk about solar farms. So that would be utility grade, where somebody puts in, the main purpose of the property is to provide solar energy to the grid, to the electric company for that.
Was there public comment in favor of adding that in?
You know, I don't recall at the committee level public comment about it. I couldn't say one way or another. I know Lee, just like he had mentioned that during public comment, he mentioned a lot of that during the committee as well. I think that both the solar farm and wind turbine language, you know, that's something that a lot of communities are approached with, and it would depend on if it's something you want to deal with, kind of like the SOBs, the sexually oriented businesses. You know, you can put it in now, or you can wait until somebody comes along and asks you to put it in or amend your ordinance, and you have to come up with the language.
So what is the origin of adding it? I mean, the public comment was, it wasn't in there before. If it's in there, then we deal with it. But what was the origin of the steering committee to include it?
It was more when I was going through, that was a use that a lot of communities have in there, and I put it in there. There was discussion about it, and I think the committee was more, well, let's leave it and let the planning commission determine. You know, Lee made a good argument and a good fight about it at the committee level. But I think that the committee was uncomfortable taking it out, more so kind of like the waterfront regulations. So the planning commission could see what it is, see some of the regulations, see a use that could be regulated or allowed in the community, and then be able to back down from it versus saying, why didn't you put this in? Why don't we have language, and going, you know, coming back to drafting it. And I don't know, I mean, Laura, do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion for sure on it.
Mr. Chairman.
And the discussion was, I'm just curious how it, again, the origin. Are there proponents for it? I mean, Sarah Ducini said other communities have it. We're not other communities. Maybe some things fit, maybe they don't. I don't really have, I read through it. I thought the language was weak on mitigation. You know, here's what you have to do to build it, and it's kind of minimum, no particular lot size, but I think anything can be mitigated. But does it fit or not? Does it fit in with the land use, you know, with the master plan, those kinds of things? I was wondering if that was part of the discussion, saying it does fit. Here's why. And we've had people approach the township for it, so we got to consider it. Or if that hasn't happened, I'm just curious how any use, but that's an interesting one because we heard about it tonight. How did it get in there to begin with?
Kevin, you had it.
Well, I think I shared back in November how, having been a part of solar farms and wind turbine farms in Indiana, and I strongly, I am very in favor of eliminating 625 and 627 from the ordinance. I mean, it does not fit.
Yeah, I had three main areas. And the reason I asked the opening questions was all around trying to get a sense for, was there input that provided, hey, we should put these in there? Or to your point, I get it. You're just saying that, hey, these other communities haven't put it in there. You can always take it out and let the people see it, let the commission see it. So, and that's fine. That makes sense. So there are three areas: the solar panel farm, the wind turbines, and the sexually oriented businesses were three that I thought of, and I was kind of flagging, like, do we need those here or not? And your other point, Sarah, was that sometimes what can happen if you don't have them, then you need to be prepared if somebody comes forward, wants to push it, then you're kind of scrambling, trying to introduce it. My general view is that if it's not listed, it's not a right. I'd rather deal with that when the time comes, just from the standpoint of, like, okay, yeah, we could be left a little bit unprepared if we're not careful. But on the other hand, it makes it very clear to somebody coming in what our view is if it's not there. So, but it's certainly open for discussion. Do we want to hit those and kind of draw that conclusion now, or wait till we get to that section? I guess I would
Let's
ask
get it
our
out of the
members.
way. It shouldn't take long.
Well, I
Trust me.
yeah.
Trust me.
So Laura, what's your view on this?
I personally haven't been educated other than basically what Lee's told me and, what I've looked at since. And it's something, it sounds like you've got to really be looking forward, and it sounds really difficult to handle any of those that, end up dying out, so that you can take care of what's left behind properly as far as the wind turbines. The solar piece, I know as far as like the personal solar piece, I feel like a lot of people were in favor of that. And for the solar farms, I don't remember in particular, this was something that the committee pointed out, but personally, I think with a lot of the ag that we've got around, and we're struggling to make money there, that may be some way for them to use that land in a productive way. So I personally would look closer at it.
On the solar farm piece.
Yeah.
So more, not in favor of the wind turbines, but more in favor of the solar farms. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, what's your take on this? Either one?
No.
Okay. Kevin, we heard your view.
I have a couple more.
Okay.
items. So I'm not opposed to, personal use, for turbine or solar power. Totally in agreement with that for your own use. But when you start getting into wind turbines, you're going to have to start dealing with decommissioning, land use agreements, economic development, and there's a lot of things that go into that. And when you start dealing with that in the community that we live in the township, that's why I would be firmly against the solar part or the wind turbine part. It just doesn't fit.
Denise?
I agree, definitely agree with personal solar, that should be in there and allowed. But one thing I have a question, is there a precedent for having a plan to educate our citizenry regarding these issues? Because I do think we are going to face the solar based on everything that I've been reading and the situation with farmers and when they're ready to retire and the children don't want it and they need to have something to retire on. I think we are going to be faced with that. So being prepared for that kind of issue. But I don't feel like I personally know. I know it's not without consequence, even solar. Because they have a lifetime, and when that lifetime is up, then what happens? So I appreciate the public comment, and I hear you when you say, where is everybody? But and I don't know that it's the Planning Commission responsibility, but is there a way of getting more people on board already so they kind of know that this is why these are our values and this is why we're going in this direction, so that it's not always, we're the bad guys or, the township.
I mean, I think if there's an opportunity to talk about wind and solar in the master plan update and the survey related to that, if you're interested in that with the Planning Commission, if you want to get the feedback that people either support it or they don't support it from that perspective. There is opportunities as well for education on solar and wind, renewable energy. There's a presentation that, the Planning Commission or the public can have. Obviously, that's a spin more. I mean, it's educating you about those uses, but moving towards those uses. So I'm not going to say that it's unbiased or they'll tell you some of the consequences of it. But obviously there's a lot of push at all different levels to move towards the renewable energy uses. So that's always an option too. If you were interested in it more broadly, I'd be happy to reach out and try to set something up. And that could be open to the Planning Commission and the public, kind of as an informational session, or whatever you'd like for that.
I like the idea of getting public input with the master plan. I mean,
Yeah.
regardless of what we do here, we can all change it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you pull it out and you are interested in what the public has to say about it. And the only thing is that, if you go through the process and you put it in the survey and an overwhelming majority comes back and says, I want you to put solar farms in, and you're going to go, no, we have no interest, I don't want to write a question that's going to lead us somewhere that the Planning Commission is not comfortable moving forward in that direction. Unless you're like, okay, everybody wants it.
Well, I think
I'll get
with
over it.
anything, if there was a strong input, but right now, I don't think we're getting strong input on any of these matters.
No,
You
I
know,
mean, we
so-
haven't been approached by the public. There's not been calls. There's not been questions or interest in amending the ordinance at this time,
Right.
you know,
Okay.
individually, no.
Bill, did you have any
Yeah.
further comments on this?
I mean, I really don't know enough about the negative impacts of a solar or wind farm other than aesthetics and stormwater runoff. What I know from what I read in the draft from the steering committee is it's not very tight definition of what would be required to mitigate those impacts. And so I've got some comments in there that would frankly make the criterion requirements pretty darn strict to where it would be unlikely that one would get approved. And so that has me thinking, should it be in there at all? But I think that grading and drainage is a huge issue beyond aesthetics. I don't think they look right here. I'm not sure that they look right anywhere, but I don't think that's what I'm trying to make a decision based on. I'm not sure of the connection to any lake other than stormwater runoff, which I know is an issue during construction. Because the grading, and depending on the site, can be extensive and can last for a long time. And without the proper SWIPs to prevent that, then water goes everywhere. So I think, my opinion is our choice is either to write it with very specific and strict requirements or not include it. And I think being uneducated about what all those impacts might be, I think we would struggle to write very strict criteria for what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed.
Exactly. So I
Because
think
we
your
know
second
it.
option
I know
makes a lot
that
more
I don't
sense.
know enough, and maybe we don't know enough. So it may be in the best interest to kick that can down the road a bit, approve the personal, and get a little more educated. Maybe if some applications come in, we get educated that way. But that's kind of my question. What prompted it to be on the list?
Right.
To be not on the list, added to the ordinance to be considered, because I want to respect that and not just say, it was a bad idea. Somebody evidently thought it was, some people thought it was a good idea. So I went about editing what was written to make it more specific. What could be allowed? It's starting with, it says no minimum lot size. Well, that really doesn't make sense, both from a financial perspective of an applicant or for us. We wouldn't want to see it on a 5-acre property, I don't think. We wouldn't want to see it on a wooded property, probably,
So let's do this. There's not strong, other than personal use of solar and wind for like a small, whatever you'd call that. There's no reason, and the public input we have received is for not having it. We've had 2 there, we've had others. So let's take those out.
Yep.
And we'll address the sexually oriented businesses, because that was my third one when we get to it.
Can we have a vote on that?
Do we even need it? We can
I
have
mean,
one.
straw poll's fine. I mean,
So
does
does
anybody want
anybody
an
have-
eye on the cell?
I'd just like a vote on it so it goes. So I think we're all in agreement where it is with personal use is good. There's just, to Bill's point, there are so many issues when somebody commercially, and Lee probably knows this, but when somebody comes in commercially, there is so much, it's just huge. I mean, there's lots of money that could come into the township by something like that, but to get it generated and go, it's just, the area is not set up for that at all. So I guess,
So do we need
We're not
a vote?
required to. I mean, if you want to make a motion, you're welcome to. I'll take it out of the document. But whatever you want to do. If you feel the need to make a motion, make a motion.
I just would like it for public record because that is it's big, pretty big. 'Cause I would make a motion that we remove 6.25 and 6.27 from any further discussion or ordinance in the book moving forward.
I would vote yes on that if we agreed that we would provide unbiased education.
Oh, I
Either
think
way.
that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That's all right.
Do we have, the 6.25 is the solar panel, is that where it references the personal as well?
No.
Okay, so the personals, so if we strike 6.25, that takes out the commercial solar panel farms.
Yeah, I think it'd be I think, Kevin, if you, some critique of your motion.
Okay, sure.
Would
that's
be
fine.
to remove solar farms and
Wind turbines.
and wind turbine generators from throughout the zoning ordinance, and that way I'll strike it from the
Thank you.
articles. Okay. And strike it where necessary from Article 6 as well.
Who's going to make that motion? Kevin, you want to restate your motion, and we'll get a second for it?
Per what Sarah said, to just remove the solar and the wind turbine generators from the ordinance.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that addresses that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So Sarah, from proceeding through this, from where we were last time, you gave a great summary. Do we just want to, I think we just kind of go through and see if people, commission members have questions or points they'd like to raise.
Yeah, I think
In
that
Article
makes
3.
sense. We talked a little bit, kind of my last comment was the opening paragraph for the timber reserve. There was some language there that we needed to look at. It came from the existing ordinance, but just because it was talking about being wet with high water table in that section, that maybe that's not appropriate for that. And we kind of stopped there with most of the comments, so I don't know if it makes sense to just pick up kind of right after 3.2, and if anybody has any comments.
That's fine with me. I do have a question on the map itself.
Sure.
So the overlay district, well, for a wetland, for the water overlay, waterfront overlay, I guess that's what it's called. Who defines a wetland?
Wetland is, well, let me see what I did for the definition on it. I think all of your wetlands are regulated because they're within 500 feet of a water body, would be my guess, or are connected to a water body. So it would be the state would regulate a wetland,
Well,
at least the filling of it.
'Cause where I'm going with that is two levels. One is, at least for the bay, I can't speak for Torch, but for the bay, you got Eagle that regulates all kinds of stuff associated with it. And then they also regulate wetlands that they define as wetlands.
Mhm.
And they've got all kinds of resources to do that, and they've had those resources for years, resources that Township doesn't have. So at least for those bodies, and again, it doesn't address Torch, so we have to address that, because I don't think Eagle regulates Torch, does it, or does it?
Torch Lake?
Yes.
If there's a wetland that's attached to Torch Lake, it would be regulated by Eagle.
Okay. Because an example that came up fairly recently over here in Bay Colony Road, there's those small lots that are in timber reserve. And an applicant came in and went to the ZBA and got approval, not disputing that occurred. But if you look at the overlay, the wetland overlay, I think touches that as well. So it would apply as the timber reserve and the waterfront overlay as a wetland. I was trying to zoom in the map to see that.
Yeah, so according to this map, it would.
Because when you look at that, then Eagle, my understanding was the applicant talked to Eagle, and Eagle said this is not a wetland, which was surprising to me, but that could very well be. And then we end up getting in this spot where the township is regulating a wetland, but we don't have clear definition around a wetland, but Eagle says it's not a wetland. So I just want to make sure that we're consistent there and not trying to supersede Eagle when they're monitoring of
Yeah.
wetlands.
I guess my comment to that is I need to go back to the GIS technician to see where that information came from that made that overlay. We define wetlands as being based on what Eagle can regulate, their definition of wetlands for that. So let me find out more information about that. to see, because I don't know.
Okay, and kind of piggybacking on top of that, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but in the overlay section that has to do with the 30, I think it's the 30-foot zone that you described there to protect the boundary right up against the lake,
Yeah.
that, that we could impose that on the waterfront properties. I'm not opposed to having something like that in place, but Eagle already manages that. So Eagle will come in and raise Cain if you're cutting trees and doing stuff on the bay at least.
I think that's because of the dunes or steep slopes that is regulated by the state versus like that on Torch Lake is not regulated in any way by Eagle.
Okay.
And not all of the bay is, in a steep slope or a critical dune. A lot of it is, but there are some parcels that are not included in that. So yeah, we may not have a lot of say in some of that if the state overrides us for those regulations.
Yeah, and I can say personally, I'm in the high risk erosion area and the critical slope stuff. And then I'm trying not to make sure myself or others aren't regulated by bodies that are conflicting or
Right.
one's more restrictive, because the Eagle's always very restrictive and always have to get a consultant to help with it. Other comments, questions on 3.2 and going forward from there?
So I thought we went through this at the end of June meeting, the Timberland Reserve section.
We did.
So I'm not sure if I heard you, Sarah, the tables that follow it on page 20 and 30 don't seem to fit it at all. Is that right? That might have been one of the things you were going to check on.
I don't have it marked, but let me look.
I mean, the one paragraph, my comments, there ought to be two paragraphs that describe the timber reserve. The tables that follow it just don't seem to fit it.
Based on the intent section.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I did mark the intent section to go back and take a look at that, because that came out of our current.
And I'm not sure if any tables go there, but if they do, it's not the ones that are in there. They feel like they were cut and pasted from a different section entirely that don't, at least when I went through it a couple different times, I'm like, I don't quite understand what these uses are compared to the way that the timber reserve is defined.
I had the exact same question. My comment was, are these, seems like the uses are inconsistent with the intent and purpose.
Right. So I think to anybody who reads it, in addition to us, it'd be super confusing. And so if they don't belong, we have to strike them. But I'm mainly asking you, they don't seem appropriate to be in here. Are there other ones that should be here instead?
Yeah, these are the same or similar to what are currently allowed in the Timber Reserve District. Because the Timber Reserve District allows all of your R1 uses in there. Plus, some of the specific about harvesting timber is allowed there. And it talks about bed and breakfast. Where's the upland game one? Because that's, and low impact, including upland game, bird hunting preserves. So, a lot of those uses are already in the current ordinance. I agree with you.
So it's about preservation and it has educational facilities, for example. I can't see where the township would say it makes a lot of sense. Take a timberland reserve that we're trying to preserve, but build a school in it. So it has some of the supplemental standards in there that loosen up what the intent says about that district.
Or a cell phone tower.
Right.
Right. And I
So
think,
I guess at a minimum, and I haven't gone through, I would strike a whole bunch of things that don't seem to be consistent with the intent.
Yeah.
Even though it was already in there. It's our chance to make it better.
yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. And a lot of them come over because they're allowed in the R1 district is why
Right.
you're seeing that transition over. But
So
yeah,
again, my read of this is then we shouldn't even have the timber reserve district if most of the things that apply to the R1 district.
Mhm.
But it seems like we're trying to preserve some certain areas of the township. People say, well, they're all in the R1 district too. It's kind of like, what's the point?
Right.
So I would put it to either the production of timber or a pretty tight restriction on how to preserve it with minimal development.
Right.
But what's listed in the tables isn't very minimal.
I mean, I think that it would make sense to, I'd have to go back and look at the master plan. But my reaction is to make timber R1, change it to that district. But then now that we have additional regulations related to wetlands and those preservation things, that overlay kind of protects that property and limits development anyways, where our current ordinance doesn't necessarily have that protection. So I think you're accomplishing some of the same things except for, because the timber is, I guess, not even in this list in the new ordinance. Versus it is in the current ordinance. And the reason that I did not bring it over is because it talks about harvesting timber in accordance with approved conservation practices. And it goes on and on and on, which you can do on your property regardless if it's listed in the zoning ordinance or not. I can't tell you that you can't harvest timber off of your property. So to list it in the ordinance is, I mean, you can, but it's something you can already do. So it doesn't need to be called out in great detail of how and why and what you do that. So it may make more sense to scrap the district in the sense that we're protecting the natural resources or the, what do I want to say? The sensitive areas in a different way that in our current ordinance, we are not doing, but in the draft, we are potentially. But I'd have to read the master plan before I tell you to completely scrap the district.
I think that makes sense to explore that, Sarah, because thinking that in a little different way and kind of piggybacking further on what Bill was just saying, it's almost like we're trying to preserve more with the timber reserve. But at the same token, we're getting, for these listed by right uses as an example, even though many of them have special use permit requirements, they're actually more liberal than we have in other places. So we're making it easier to do things on timber reserve than we are in R1 in many instances, even though we're trying to protect more of the resource that's there.
What do we have in the timber today? Is it a lot of residential and Barnes Park?
It's a lot of larger parcels, except for some of those parcels that are on Bay Colony that are very small in there. So
I guess the only other thing to consider, well, among others, is we've got the overlay for the water. That's to protect the water in the wetlands. Another resource we could think about is the forest itself, the timber. So does that suggest having a more defined timber reserve area, or could it be accomplished with modifications to the overlays or an additional overlay that just applies to everything? I think those are good questions to maybe research a little bit.
yeah, let me take that back and take a look at it. I think that you all make very great points.
So what, if you're going to take it back and look at it, then we're going to get what?
I'll come back and tell you what I found. If this is one of those things that probably before I go through and scrap it, I would come back and say, I looked in the master plan, here's some thoughts. How do you want to move forward? Because we'll have to amend the map, so we might want to take a look and see what's the most appropriate for some of these properties to go to. Or we may have to say, oh, we'll come back to it after the master plan. That's kind of where I'm at on it. So I'll read through that master plan and see, and then I'll also check to see that our language that we're putting in still preserves some of those sensitive properties enough that we're comfortable with
It,
that.
it does feel a bit like we're without that as a guide, what's in the master plan. So far, we've talked about tonight, feels like preservation, you know, of the land the way it is and the character, whether it's turbines or solar or the woods, even the waterfront overlay. We're trying to protect some things, still allow some reasonable uses that fit within what should be defined in the master plan. That's why I've always thought this was a bit backwards to do the ordinance and the master plan, and we're gonna go back. I get we're gonna do the ordinance master plan, then come back and look at the ordinances. That would have me want to not include some of the things that are in this ordinance now, or to restrict it and maybe loosen it back up after the master plan.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that,
Sort of tighten up until we have a master plan that says, okay, now we have a good guide. We want to protect the shoreline, we want to protect the water, we want to protect the woods, we want to protect the bird, and what should we do in the master plan? And then what's more reasonable to consider in these different districts or in the overlay areas? So I'd want to be pretty conservative with the things that we address in the ordinance that we know we're going to go back and redefine in the master plan.
yep, that makes a lot of sense. So we want to err on the side of conservatism on these. If we're on the fence, go on the conservative side of the fence.
That makes sense. And you'll see kind of as we go through this, you're going to go, why'd we do that? And I'll go, well, that's what our current ordinance says, or we don't have the support for it. Because of where we are in that whole process that you just talked about.
Right.
For it. So we'll try to do our best to make it work and keep us in a good place. And
So question on the map itself. I know we got the kind of funky small lots on Bay Colony. Are there other areas in the township that you can think of that we could kind of highlight on the map that aren't really well defined or ambiguous based on either the overlay or the intersection between? Because we have a chance to, with this rewrite of the ordinance, to address issues with the map if we want to, correct?
right.
And maybe there's none. So I'm just asking the question. Are there more odd areas that you're aware of out there that you've seen that?
I think we struggle in general with a lot of the waterfront, more so maybe on the bay side because of the critical dunes than on the lake side, on Torch Lake side. A specific area I can't really call out. I'm kind of just going generally. Probably the bay properties struggle a little bit more. The roads are kind of close, making the properties not very deep for construction. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's where most of our variance requests come through, are kind of dealing with dunes, private roads, and the limited space because there's so many cottages that are being either rebuilt or remodeled for that. And then the only other thing I can think of right now, off the top of my head, would be dealing with the airport. We've talked about that a lot. And so we've not approached that in this zoning update at all. That's something that we're kind of waiting for the master plan and then come back to after the master plan for that component and what that looks like. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
It did. And to your comments on the kind of bay areas along the bay, I mean, from the comments that Bill had just made, if we're kind of wanting to be conservative and, protecting the resources, I mean, most of those issues on the bay come up with requests for zoning variances because they're locked in by the dune itself. So it's the tightness of some of those requirements that are driving the behavior of trying to, require permits, even if they bump up against the road or what have you. So that's probably consistent with what we're trying to accomplish, at least for now.
Okay, so timber reserve, I will take a look at, I'll report back. We'll figure out how we're gonna move forward with that. Did anybody have anything in the ag district?
I don't, but one last comment. I think I mentioned this in the last meeting. The ordinance says timber reserve,
Yes.
the map says timber residential,
Yes.
which is probably why it has all those residential uses listed as it. It seems inconsistent to me. Right.
On ag, I had a note about duplexes. Is that in there somewhere and I missed it? I know we talked about duplexes last time.
Duplexes are not in the ag district. We do allow accessory dwelling units in the ag district. One of the comments that I have is I'm gonna go through and change like single family to one family dwelling, so it'll be at the top of the list, and duplex to two family dwellings, so they're easier to find. But I don't believe that we brought the duplexes over to ag. I think they're limited to the R2 district.
I would be in favor of it being included.
In the ag district.
Yes.
Okay. I have a question regarding telecommunication towers. We haven't talked about them, at least that I'm familiar with, other than we mentioned them briefly earlier. Are they similar to solar energy farms and wind turbine generators that we want to? I think they are. Anybody disagree with that?
I missed what you said. I'm sorry.
So we talked about wind turbine generators and solar farms, but we didn't talk about cell phone towers. I would put cell phone towers in a similar category. I'm not quite as negative on them, but generally speaking, why would we list them as a special use permit use? Why not just cut them out altogether?
So I think about, we're talking about ag, right? Or in general?
Well, it's ag right now, but in general, I
Yeah,
would
yeah.
across the board.
So when you read the paragraph or so about ag, it talks about the the pieces of land that aren't suitable for ag. And those are things you could have a special use permit for. Based on the vote that we're trying to have on solar energy farms and wind turbine generators, I'd propose that comes out of the table on regulated uses under ag. Telecommunication, the cell towers seem to fit with that piece of property that's not quite suitable for ag. So it's an aesthetic issue, I think. So it seems to fit within the intent compared to the several acres you would need for wind turbines or solar, that I don't think that, of all the ag, there's probably it's a big chunk of our township ag, and yet there are still some parcels that probably don't fit within the intent for ag. Doesn't take much property for a cell tower. So I think your concern, probably mine and everybody else's, we need them, but we don't like to see them. And I don't know how you regulate that in an ordinance. So I'm not for or against it. I think it fits within this regulated use table under ag. Not liking them or wanting them is a different issue. I'm not sure how to address it.
I would leave it.
You would leave it?
Yeah.
Kevin?
Well, I think Bill is spot on. Yeah, a lot of times you don't like to see them, but the footprint is very small by comparison. I guess a special variance, I mean, remove it, they can come to you, correct?
It's a special use permit. Required a special use permit now.
Yeah.
So the township and the planning commission would have a decision on its location and whether, first of all, whether or not it fits that
Right.
parcel that is inconsistent with good use for ag and probably otherwise. I guess I'm proposing we leave it in there because it makes sense with the intent, but we regulate it through a special use permit conversation.
I guess that's the way I'm leaning also. I'm thinking there's some uses down the road that could maybe benefit us, but that's going to be a special use. the name.
Jason or Denise, you guys agree with that?
I agree. I think the cell towers, it's a necessary part of our life. I'd rather have a cell tower than all the telephone poles and the wires going everywhere.
Hmm.
You know, and 100 years ago, nobody wanted those. So it's part of
Okay.
how we live. It's part of how farmers live. Their automation of, you know, machinery and everything. So I agree that it should be a special use permit, and I think we have to have them.
Jason?
Yeah, I agree with everything they just said.
Okay. No, I'm totally good with that as well. I prefer not to have them, but I'm not nearly as polarized on this as the other things we talked about, so I'm totally fine with that. Okay. So I just continuing through section 3.
Yeah, so any other questions about uses in the ag district?
Going to
Then R1
R1.
district? And the R2?
I just said, this is a general question for R1, and I guess it fits R2 as well. Any kind of use that would involve groups of people regularly meeting, so obviously religious institutions, it could be certain businesses in general that could, I'm trying to see, kind of educational things maybe, something like that. I guess those things would come up in the special use permit and we would address them then.
Right. They would have to
Parking and
com-
all of that.
Yeah, they'd have to comply with the, you know, your special use standards.
Okay.
The religious institutions is a hard one because, you know,
Absolutely.
as planners, they used to be like traditionally the center of your neighborhoods, right? And we're not really developed in that way, except for maybe in the village a little bit, where you can have that center of your neighborhood feel. But we also used to have, you know, religious institutions that were small. You didn't have the mega institutions that generated all the traffic. So we've changed as society and how we use them and what that looks like.
Yeah,
But
for sure. And
there's some case law related to them as well, so that's the struggle.
so R1, R2, any other questions or? We had some discussion last time in R2 around the definitions, I think, didn't we?
We did about the shared wall. I think Bill brought that up, that to him a duplex had a shared wall or a shared floor and roof. It wasn't two standalone structures. So I was gonna add some language in there about the shared wall.
Okay. How about village? Any comments on village?
I had a question about D, in the variety of design. And I know at one time there was some discussion about, as we develop our villages, to have a more cohesive design. I just wanted to know if that could be teased out a little bit.
Yeah, and so this language was the same or very similar to what you adopted in October, almost 2 years ago now. When I say October, feels like yesterday. And we're kind of running into some of that, looking at it during the master plan process of trying to get a better idea of what that should look like and getting some more design information. And so I just kind of left it at what we had. for that. But I agree, I think this is definitely a spot that should come back to. Unless there's something specific that you're thinking about that maybe we can add in there.
Not really, but what I've been reading and looking at urban or rural planning and that, the idea of form more than function,
Mm-hmm.
and that what really matters is what things look like more than what is actually going on in the business. Not being so picky about what the business is, but, having that cohesive look. So that was just for clarification.
I guess I even read that differently. I can read it differently, where design isn't a visual design, but just the design of that lot.
Yeah, I think that's a great discussion that we'll have to have going through the master plan and maybe getting some input, because you can have some visual preference items during either our survey or some of our open house or community input that talks about what do you want it to look like, and that'll help guide us into the right language for that.
So I think as part of the master plan, I think I proposed this before, that we create some specific area plans that define what we want the villages and, Eastport and Torch Lake to look like. I think a way to accomplish something in this ordinance that helps lead to that, I'll read item B with some wordsmithing, and maybe it helps, because I share your interest in this. To maintain and enhance the existing, I would cut out the word small town and just say to maintain and enhance the existing character of the unincorporated villages or hamlets of Eastport and Torch Lake, through design enhancements and consistency. Because that's really what specific area plans do. It says, we're going to take these two areas and put some design criteria or guidelines. Here's some things we're trying to accomplish with facades, with landscaping, with fencing, with, parking behind, that over time as things get developed, then there's a look and feel that we'd want the township residents to help us define through a master plan process. But we can at least add those small words. I say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. So when you get into Torch Lake, there's something that starts to look like, okay, I've arrived at a particular place that feels like the township. Deal with it in the detail in the master plan through specific area plans.
I like
Small
that.
word changes that get us a little bit there.
I like consistency.
Yep.
Will you read that again?
Oh, sorry. All right. To maintain and enhance the existing character. So take out the word small town. Leave the rest of the unincorporated villages or hamlets of Eastport and Torch Lake, through design enhancements and consistency.
Perfect.
That's good. Any other comments up through village?
There was 366, is it supposed to say commercial and C? 366C?
366C.
C.
On page 47,
Yes.
all structures containing commercial uses
Ooh,
shall.
maybe I'm looking at the wrong version. Maybe you changed it already. I'm sorry.
This is from October 10th.
Yeah, mine is also marked October 10th, but it's the one that I put comments on, so it's not the same, maybe. And the one that's online isn't loading for me. So if it doesn't say commercial now, great.
Okay,
What's it say?
like 3.6.6 says additional requirements.
Yep. And then C, all structures containing.
Yep, commercial uses shall be limited to 5,000 square
that.
feet.
That.
Yeah.
Is it commercial? Commercial uses?
You're thinking like all uses instead of commercial?
I don't know. It just seems weird that it said commercial specifically in the village. I don't know if there's a better word.
I guess I'm indifferent. I mean, it's highly unlikely you'd have a 5,000 square foot residential use in the village, but. So it could just
So
be
I'm sorry,
uses.
what are you working
So
on?
item C, so on page 47, if it needs to say commercial uses, or if it should just say uses. If it needs to be specific about commercial.
So if it's a house, it could be 6,000 square feet, is basically what we're saying.
Right. Yeah, I think the reason. Currently in our zoning ordinance, we limit the size in the village business. But we did not put a size restriction in village residential. And so I'm guessing that's why I brought over the word commercial. Because this is in a little bit different order, but I'm not married to it one way or another, if anybody has a thought on it.
Well, then we've got the village business overlay on top of that, right? Which is the 31, stuff that boundaries the roads.
Right.
I mean, I don't have an issue with the word commercial uses there, defining it, because that's really what we're trying to
Wrangle.
regulate anyway, so.
Okay.
Any other questions on, or comments on, I guess we're getting into the commercial district now, item C.
I've got a question on village still.
Okay.
In the regulated uses lists a lot of different uses. The off-street parking and loading standards only gives the standards for the residential uses. In the village hamlet feel, got to refer to the design aesthetics, it doesn't address any of the uses other than residential for parking. Shouldn't it? So it's the table on the top of page 47. Says, here's how
Okay.
parking got to go for residential,
Oh,
but the village land uses include a lot of different things beyond residential. And it doesn't address the off-street parking loading standards for any of them.
yeah, so any of the residential uses, basically you can have parking anywhere you'd like and no loading zones, but then for any of the other uses, it's telling you where you can put parking and how you can put parking and your loading zones. That's what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so for the commercial or the educational or cultural uses that would be allowed in the district, shouldn't there be off-street parking and loading requirements? In fact, I think the loading requirements doesn't seem to apply to resident, I guess it could apply to residential, but it seems like there's the bottom half of that table missing. That is all the other uses beyond residential. And those are the ones I think that really define the character of the village and hamlet anyway. It's the commercial uses and what they look like and how the parking is. So we go into I think, good decisions in the table that's there for residential, setback, bicycle loading zone screening, but it doesn't say anything for commercial. Maybe it's handled in some other section, but it seems like it's a missing piece on this page.
No, I think that it is. So when you look at the top of the table, you've got the first line that's got V, off-street parking and loading standards, and then the next row says item, residential uses, all other uses.
All other uses, okay. So that's why it's side and rear if it's not residential. Okay,
Right.
got it.
Does that satisfy what your
does.
Your concern, I guess?
Thank
you. Okay. You know, I had a different community have that same comment, and so I don't know. There must be something about how the table looks that you don't catch it.
Maybe it's because the off-street parking lots cuts across, and so the columns get separated a little bit visually,
Yeah,
but
I don't know. You're just not the first one that's had that same comment, Bill. Okay, anything else in Village? Okay, commercial.
is there anything that was added to this list of use by right that wasn't in the current ordinance?
I would have to get back with you. I don't remember. There
I mean,
probably,
it's tasting rooms and things like that. Sexually oriented businesses, I think you did add.
right.
I had noted that we might want to talk about campgrounds. Maybe nobody cares, but I had it noted.
Yeah. I feel like, was that a conversation at the committee or was that a conversation, that was at the committee, I think, about campgrounds and that everybody, not everybody, but it seems like campgrounds are kind of one of those recreational, they have low impact on the neighbors when actually they can have greater impact on the neighbors because of traffic and smoke and noise. So a lot of ordinances are not very strict related to campgrounds when maybe there should be some other considerations for campgrounds.
Yeah. Because we do have commercial in some weird places, I feel like.
Yeah, and I don't know, did we take, campgrounds were a special use in the current ordinance.
For which districts? For all
For
districts?
the commercial district,
I would definitely say we should put it back to
Yep.
special use.
I would agree with that. It's a good catch.
you're really testing my memory on that one. It's filed somewhere in there. It may come out eventually, but
As
it's
to
been a
why-
while.
It's filed as to when the conversation was, or filed as to why it was shifted to by right?
The whole conversation about campground.
Well, there was conversations around camping associated with the air park,
Yeah,
and putting it on the runway, but it was a special use permit
yeah.
because the runway was defined, I think, as commercial in our current ordinance. So it probably came up around that. In fact, I know it came up around that.
It's a hot topic anywhere around here, I feel like,
Mhm.
campgrounds.
Anyone on the commission disagree with changing campgrounds in the commercial to SUP as opposed to by right?
Ask your question again.
So, and there's a table on page 50.
Right, I
and
got
it's-
that, but.
Yep. And then if you look down to campgrounds, right now, the ordinance, the proposed ordinance says campgrounds are by right. But in the current ordinance, it's by special use permit.
I think it should be special use permit.
Okay. Okay, can you change that, Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah, this district is one of the districts that I really don't like, and it kind of scares me. But this is what our current ordinance has. Just because there's one parcel here that's commercial, one parcel there that's commercial, it's kind of an interesting dealing for it. I don't have a good suggestion right now. I will when we get to the master plan.
So in the interim, if you think that that would be better addressed with the master plan,
Yeah.
we don't want to do anything here that's more.
Yeah, and I guess I'm concerned, I don't want to take away a commercial zoning designation from somebody and downzone them or change that and kind of start a
Sure.
whole hornet's nest over that for the
No, and that's
zoning
reasonable.
ordinance.
On the flip side, if there's categories, I think one thing to do is to do a compare if there's anything that was added to this list.
Mhm.
Specifically, if it shifts from a by right to an SUP or vice versa.
We don't have anything here. I'm not missing an outdoor event, right? I had some note about it. I think we moved it.
No, it's not in here.
Okay.
Is it?
Oh,
Outdoor events?
Where?
under O's?
No, I was thinking that it wasn't in here.
Amendment effective May 3rd of 2019.
Oh, in the current ordinance? Yeah, it is in the current, but it's not in the draft.
So we removed it. So does that affect? Maybe it's not an event, like the Pine Hill outdoor area, that would be an event.
No,
What,
no, I think Pine Hill, they would either have outdoor storage or outdoor sales and displays. Both of theirs could fit into either one of that, I think.
Other questions in commercial?
Okay.
Hearing none, can we move into overlays? It's relatively short. So we talked about this earlier, Sarah, but under 4.2.2, the established wetlands, is who establishes that it's a wetland? And just so if we can make sure we've got that figured out. Under 4.2.4, the walkways and stairways.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've had some public input on that if you have more than one, because the minimum lot size is 100 feet wide, that if you have multiple, that you could have, I guess, whatever the easy way of a proportionate. But if you had 200-foot parcels, you could have two stairways.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you had 300 feet, you could have three. I mean, that's basically is, the requirement would be per 100 feet.
Right, instead of a per parcel.
Yes.
Get more boatways too when you have extra 100 feet.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
That's true. And I think actually it says that down here somewhere.
Good. That was a good topic.
So what are the thoughts for that? So specifically looking on page, it's near the top of page. I don't know, because it shifts every time. 58? No? I can't.
It's on
see my
page 50, well, the stairways is on the top of page 57.
57, okay. Yep, so item A, it says one stairway per parcel with a maximum width of 48 inches in the district. I'm changing that to one stairway per 100
Feet.
feet of water frontage.
Does everyone hear that? Because that's a fairly significant change. Is it any concerns about that?
I like it. Give them another bonus.
Then the docks and hoists,
Okay.
would be similar.
Right.
Yep, follow suit. I don't know if there's other questions in the shoreline protection strip, the 30 feet. I see now, based on our conversation earlier, Sarah, about the importance of having this, especially for torch.
So I had a question on how much of 4.2.6 was in the existing ordinance and how much of this was added?
That whole section is added.
Okay.
There's currently no language in your zoning ordinance about vegetation along the shoreline. And I don't recall when Heidi was here, she's the, she was the
DNR.
past I'm sorry, soil erosion officer.
Mhm.
And kind of talked about, helping filter stormwater and all of that into the lake and really liking vegetation. And so I know there was some interest. I don't know if it was this, I just don't remember if it was this planning commission or if it was the members prior to this planning commission that heard from her.
Prior.
Okay. But, so there was interest in it at that time. But yes, this is all new language. Shoreline protection strip is difficult language because if you're putting it in and you haven't had anything in the past, it's a change for a lot of people. I think that there's definitely an educational component to it to explain why we're trying to put the vegetation in. I think once the public kind of understands the purpose of it, it helps because you're preserving the water and water quality. But I also understand people like to put grass and fertilize it and mow it right to the edge of the water.
I like the way it's written. It accomplishes a lot of things, which is why I asked if it was in there before. Talk about water quality issues from solar or turbine, its removal of native vegetation and trees along shoreline that is a much bigger impact. And I think, the part where it says, don't remove anything, build the house and find the view sheds, I think it's written well. Has TLPA weighed in on this at all? Torch Lake
I've not heard it
Protection
from
Alliance?
anybody.
It'd be interesting to get their thoughts to see if some of the percentages identified and things like that, even the width of the strip to preserve is consistent with what they're trying to accomplish, which also goes to water quality and, aesthetic preservation. It seems consistent with things I've read that they've written, but I don't know if it maybe needs to go further to protect some of the invasive species. Might want to limit what can be planted, so it does address what not to take out that's native. But I appreciate whoever wrote it.
No, I agree. It makes sense to me, and I thought it was well placed. But having said, I'm always dealing with Eagle personally, so that so this makes sense, and so it's consistent with the types of things that Eagle would suggest. Maybe a small comment on the planting size standards on page 59, just to reinforce and put the word native in front of plant material.
Perfect. Yeah, I was thinking, did I include that? I guess up in that paragraph further, it says the shoreline protection strip shall be replanted solely with native vegetation as identified.
You absolutely did. I was
I was
just,
just
because
trying-
people tend to go right to the table,
Yep,
and I just
I
wanted to
like
just
that.
reinforce it.
but that's why I was like, did I put that in there or did I
Yeah, you
not put
did,
that
for
in
sure.
there? So. Well, that was an easier sell than I thought it was gonna be.
I'm in agreement with everything that has been previously said, but I wondered if there's any precedent with, under E, um, upon sale of property, if it hasn't been, the shoreline hasn't been restored, would there be a requirement for that?
In zoning, we would not be able to trigger it with sale.
Okay.
So move into village business.
Yeah, and so the village business basically says anything that's in the village district, but then has the frontage on 3188 or Barnes Park Road can be village business. And it adds some additional special uses. And it moves the special, in the village district, the use table, anything that's a special use becomes a permitted use. And then these are your special uses.
Is there anything in here that is an add from prior? Or is this consistent with what was there before, from what you can remember?
I believe there is an add to it, but I don't know what it is. I'd have to go back and compare the two. In drafting this section, looking at uses that are typically in your village areas, so either they're walkable uses or maybe more intense, because we have such limited commercial area, and the commercial area is kind of in funny places. So really, I'm looking at your villages as being your commercial districts that are going to house most of your commercial uses. So expanding those or maybe redefining some of those uses or something that you traditionally would see. For example, like outdoor seating is listed in this under 4.3.3, which we don't have anything about outdoor seating or dining currently, but like Torch Cafe already has outdoor seating. And in your
that's a good
villages, a lot of
addition.
times you have it. And after COVID, we've seen how people like to have it. And you'll notice that's one where it says outdoor seating. It doesn't say outdoor dining, because perhaps you want to have outdoor seating for, I don't know, some other use. Kind of like drive-throughs. We always talk about like drive-through banks. Well, now you have drive-through coffee shops or drive-through marijuana places or,
Farms, yeah.
yeah, instead of being specific about it. So as long as it meets the requirements of the ordinance.
Any questions on village overlay? If none, Sarah, it might be, we're at 8:30. We've said we wanted to try to keep these to
Yep.
90 minutes. Seems like we're at a pretty good stopping point. I actually think we made very good progress tonight. We went through some meaty articles.
Yeah.
I think we've got some good direction.
Yeah.
Any general comments or anything else that you'd like to bring up before we close the new business for tonight? Okay, hearing none, we have ongoing reports. Zoning administrators report. I guess that would be,
And there's nothing on your desk. I'll get you a report, permit report. Usually we have that.
okay. We'll do that next time.
Yeah, the only other thing that I really have to add is that we've been dealing still in some enforcement items, issuing a couple of tickets, and going through that process. So that's not really dealing with planning commission, but just in a general zoning items. The ZBA is going to have some training here in the near future with the attorney and myself about their process and just some additional training that they asked for. And we did receive an application for a condominium development. I haven't received the money for it yet, so it's not received, not complete yet, but you may be seeing that in September potentially, depending on if we get information in. So, but I'll be doing a review on that and working through that. So, something to look forward to.
Something we get every day.
Yeah, and we'll be continuing to work on the zoning ordinance review. We're more than halfway through, so that's good. I may try to send out some dates to see if we can get some additional meetings in. I'll have to look at my calendar in August. It kind of filled up pretty quickly, but even looking out into September.
Maybe in September, if we could get a couple meetings in September, we might be able to
you can
bring
get
this
through
home.
it. I mean, I
Yep.
think we maybe another 2 of them, so 2 or 3 meetings. So I'll look at my calendar and we'll work through trying to get some additional meetings set up. I know the summertime is hard for everybody, so.
Okay. Kevin, anything from the ZBA?
Nothing to report, no meeting.
Okay. And Jason, anything from the Torch Lake Township?
I apologize. I've been out of the loop for the last month and a half with family matters, so I was not at the meeting last.
Okay.
Can I ask about the dangerous building ordinance?
I don't have any details. But you could talk to the township supervisor if you have specific questions.
I just in general, it was pretty vague in the paper.
Oh, then I'm not even, I know the township board was working on a dangerous building ordinance, but I don't know any of the details.
And the only other thing.
Didn't we table that? I'm sorry, didn't we? I thought we tabled it, didn't we? No.
Okay.
You're moving forward with that?
That'd be great. Would you
Please come up. And also, while you're there, would you please comment on the septic thing, which I think was a great development, but are there any aspects of that we should hear about?
All right, first thing, the septic ordinance was passed at the last board meeting. It was 4-0. It hit the papers. Unfortunately, we had a effective date error on it, so we're resubmitting it to the paper. It'll be in there on Thursday, and it'll be effective 30 days after that. I think that's like September 9th. I've gotten 6 different townships asking for a copy of it, because now all of a sudden there seems to be an interest, and a lot of it is because of the extra items that we added in there with the 500-foot review. So that's a big positive. We got a lot of press. In fact, we had people near our home, and they said they heard about it down in Detroit. So it's kind of interesting that it spread that far. As far as the dangerous building, we had at the last board meeting a board discussion. This has been going on for about 7 months now. And that means you guys aren't watching the meetings or looking at the agendas, but I won't say too much more about that. But really, we've been discussing it, and to be honest, the reason it came up was I got so many complaints about the green building down the road, and asked me, what's the township doing? And I had to keep saying, we have no power to do anything about that. And there was an example in Elk Rapids in which there was a fire. The building was mostly destroyed, but the insurance company and the owners were fighting over the settlement, and it sat there vacant. And Elk Rapids did not have an ordinance in which they could have forced the owners or the parties to come and resolve that. So the idea behind it is it's a multiple step process. We have 8 definitions. If one of those definitions seem to have been violated, then it would come to the township board. We would get a third-party inspector to go out and do a visual to see if in fact from the sidewalk side that we may have a problem, at which point if we do, based on that opinion, we will go to court and get an affidavit to do an inspection. We will not do trespassing on the property until we go to court. Once we get that, we will start a trial, open hearing, I guess is a better word for it. And the person will be able to defend it, and the hearing officer will be somebody that's an expert in buildings, engineering, that type of thing. If he, after that, deems the building to be dangerous, it comes back to the board. The board either agrees or disagrees with that. If we agree with the decision, then the owner of the building can go to the ZBA and challenge it there and have that discussion. And if in fact they lose at the ZBA, they can still, by going to the ZBA, they can appeal to circuit court. So it's a multiple step to protect people from the inconvenience of a neighbor that has a gripe with somebody. The definitions, we didn't have a lot of people at the meeting, but what I basically said was the structure of the ordinance is to allow an individual that has a property that is deemed dangerous by even an expert, that they have a path that they can appeal, and it's not one and done type of thing. The other is that there are clear definitions on the first page. There are 8 of them. And I mean, basically it's, the building looks like it's ready to fall down, or parts look like it's going to collapse. We use our example with the green. As you look at the front door, it looked like the roofing was coming in over a door. So they have taken steps to fix that, but if you notice, they did a lot and then it stopped. So I don't know what else is going on. But the township just didn't have any authority to do it. So we put it together. We think it's pretty clear. If somebody comes to complain to the board, it better match those 8 items, or we're not going down that path. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Well, public hearing tomorrow night at 7 here. Public can come and discuss if they like it, if they don't like it. If there's items in the first 8 definition points they think should be tighter, it's their chance. And after that, it will come to the board meeting next week from tonight, and I'll bring it up for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. So anything else for new business and ongoing reports? I think we're complete. So let's open it up for public comment.
I just want to comment about the township. We all understand that we've got a unique township here with the west boundary, all Lake Michigan, Grand Traverse Bay, and the east boundary, 95% of it's on Torch Lake. And I really appreciate the immediate consideration you gave to my recommendation about the 2 sections of solar energy farms and wind turbine farms. But I also, obviously, being prejudiced, appreciate the decisions you made, because one of the things that does is it just goes a long way to protect the quality of our environment here in Torch Lake Township. And I think that that's very important. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the township who appreciate that, and also appreciate the overall work you folks do, because there are a lot of people that pay attention to the work you do. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So the last item, concerns of the commission. I don't have any concerns. I think we did had a good meeting tonight, so thank you for your participation. Any comments or concerns from the commission members? Sarah?
Nothing additional.
Okay, with that, we will adjourn. Actually, need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Time is 8:45 PM. Thank you.